Hello and welcome to Indigenous Literatures. My name is Sakshi Kumar and I am the Adult Programs Coordinator at Writers and Books. I am an Asian American woman with brown skin and short black hair, and I am wearing a white turtleneck. My pronouns are she, her, hers. Writers and Books would like to call attention to the complex and troubled history of the lands on which we live and work. We are recording this panel from the unceded ancestral homelands of the Onondaga, or the people of the Great Hill. In English, they are known as the Seneca people, or the Keeper of the Western Door. As I mentioned, this is Indigenous Literatures. In examining the intersections between history, culture, kinship, and place, these writers will discuss the importance of recognizing and honoring Indigenous communities today. Our panelists are Ari Tyson, Annette Saunooke Clapsaddle, and our moderator is Rich Forrester. Our panelists' books will be available through Writers and Books' indie bookstore, Ampersand Books. I encourage you to read their full bios on our website, wab.org. Thank you.
Hello, Annette and Ari. It's super. I'm elated to be a part of this and to join the two of you. I feel that kind of kinship already. Just having this connection and also having read your books. My name is Rich Forrester. I am coming to you from Writers and Books' hometown of Rochester, New York, and we are being part of this Writers and Books virtual literary conference from the margins to the center. And in the spirit of our topic today, I'll share briefly that originally I'm an Alaska native of Kodiak, having grown up on an island in the Gulf of Alaska. We'll be welcoming two Indigenous literary guests of the Americas to the final panel of this year's conference, titled and subtitled Indigenous Literatures, in examining the intersections between history, culture, kinship, and place. Writers discussing the importance of recognizing and honoring Indigenous communities today. As I've done a little research on our two guests, I've discovered two modern day storytellers, award-winning, one living in rural Wisconsin, the other North Carolina, educated and educators, both having been writing since a very young age, passionate about their crafts, artistic explorers, cultural preservationists, bridging the past to the present. As I mentioned, modern day storytellers. Leslie Marmon Silko has written in her poetic novel, Storyteller, she says, with these stories of ours, we can escape almost anything. With these stories, we will survive. In this way, we hold them and keep them with us forever. And in this way, we continue. It's hard not to recognize striking similarities. It appears that both their fairly recent debut novels, which I have right here, and their lives, I dare say, epitomize these interconnections and more. Annette Saunooke Clapsaddle, an enrolled citizen of the Eastern Band of Cherokee Indians, is the author of Even as We Breathe, with a world war as the backdrop, is a novel centered around two late teen Cherokees arriving for a summer job while a young girl goes missing. Ari Tyson, a Brebe tribal member native to Costa Rica, is the author of Saints of the Household, a modern day fare navigating the emotional undercurrents behind Instagram feeds and cell phone passcodes of two Brebe brothers about to graduate high school. So I kept those introductions very short because I'd like for both authors to also introduce themselves, what they feel is important, their background, when they began writing and why, and then go ahead and go into an excerpt of your book. And I'll begin with Annette, if that's okay.
Yeah, thank you, Rich. I'm so happy to be here with you and Ari both. I'm Annette Saunooke Clapsaddle, as Rich mentioned. coming to you from a cabin in Cherokee, North Carolina, in the Great Smoky Mountains area. And just physical description, I have on a blue shirt, I have short brown hair, and I have these fabulous earrings on that I got from a local artist that are of a storm cloud with lightning. So I had to throw that in there. Yeah, so I was born and raised in Cherokee, North Carolina, and I have really only left this area for undergraduate and graduate studies. So I've been connected to this place for a very long time. And if you read my work and what I'll read here in just a second, I think we'll explain that connection and how it's informed my writing. As Rich mentioned, I've been writing since I was young. I still have these little books that we made in elementary school out of cardboard, right, and lined paper. So I don't know a time when I wasn't writing stories past the time that I learned to write. And what I found was that it took a while to realize I could write about this place and write about my culture because there were no stories specifically about Eastern Band Cherokee. My novel, Even As We Breathe, is the first published novel by a member of our tribe, which is kind of ridiculous if you know how long we've had a history of the written language for Cherokees. So, obviously there are Cherokee writers from Cherokee Nation and United Gadua bands, but it's a very different place. Oklahoma is a very different place than Western North Carolina, where our homelands are. So it's been a real honor to be one of the voices of this place. So in discussion with Rich, we actually decided he introduced the idea that I read from an essay that was recently published with Rec and Review online. And I was so thrilled when he recommended that I read from this essay, because this is probably one of the most personal essays I've ever written, and one that really explains my tie to place and writing. So I'm not going to start with an excerpt from my novel. I'm actually going to start from this essay, a part of this essay called Finding the Line. There's a point when you have to let off the brakes for your own safety. Every action you must take is contrary to everything you've ever known about self-preservation. Careful can get you killed. Speed up when a branch blocks the path in order to hit it straight on, head on. Stand instead of crouch when feeling out of control descending a mountain. In order to have the power to push forward, pedal backward. And when conditions get too slippery, yield your control to Mother Nature's design. This flexibility, this is freedom. This is mountain biking. Turns out this is also riding. A few years ago, the two converged for me and led to an unexpected discovery. I had been a damn good basketball player in high school and continued to be involved with the sport, working in my university's basketball office and coaching at various levels after graduation. But because of this lifelong dedication, my knees were shot. So after having my second child, I was pretty miserable. In my head, I was still an athlete, but my body was overweight and my energy was drained. Additionally, my first novel manuscript had apparently also chosen a sedentary lifestyle without my consent. After years of near-miss publication, I was burned out on pitching this passion project. By my mid-30s, I began to wonder if it wasn't time to just accept and settle on all fronts. I needed a change. I needed a new opportunity. I needed to start training again as both an athlete and a writer. Coincidentally, my tribe, the Eastern Band of Cherokee, was building a world-class trail system for hiking and biking. Fire Mountain Trails in my home of Cherokee, North Carolina. I had been the executive director at the Cherokee Preservation Foundation when the planning grant was funded by our organization. The whole concept of climbing mountains, especially on two wheels, seemed both impossible and intriguing. So I handed the basketball off to my sons and I let off the brakes. Almost simultaneously, I enrolled in a writing workshop called Get Her Done, Write Your Novel. Shelved the first manuscript and started renting a mountain bike from my local cycling shop. In the process of learning to ride a mountain bike, I lost over 60 pounds. I won races and gained strength. But more than anything, I met friends, life-changing friends, and I started seeing the world around me differently. I was writing a fresh new novel and learning a brand new sport. Writing and writing became inextricably linked. This confluence of paths, writing even as we breathe and becoming an avid mountain biker, put me in uncharted territory. I would become the first member of my tribe to publish a novel, so there were no comparative experiences to learn from, no advisors to call on without dialing long distance. The mountain biking world is sparsely populated by Native women and is notorious for having a quote unquote bro mentality. When I began cycling, there were no other women from Cherokee who were riding consistently enough to mentor me. I cast broad nets in search of community for the hopes that I could one day help to build a community on both fronts back home. During this time, I returned to teaching English at Swain County High School, and I rode with friends from work. These women were all older than me, in some cases a couple of decades older than me, and all balanced children and careers. They consistently kicked my tail. On our rides, we had plenty of time for them to counsel me as I caught my breath. On one such summit, my friend asked me if I was able to think about writing when I rode. I assured her that all I could think about when I climbed was which was louder, my heartbeat or my breathing. But on descents and on level paths, I could write in my head. We decided I would do that for the last leg of the ride. I did it a little too well, taking my sweet time, catching up with them. But it worked. It gave me a metaphor. It gave me a whole new writing process. I started seeing the divots in the path and the way the woods look and feel different every season, sometimes every day. I gained insight from the curves of a mountain and rock patterns in a creek. And mind you, I ride the same trails over and over again. I am on a literal path, but the end is not the objective, and my personal ride time is not the purpose. I have become more human when caked in mud and laughing with friends as I slip my way down a path in a race to beat the lightning. I become more human when I meet a rider who has battled cancer and makes no excuses for climbing slow. I am more human when I race with my former student and cheer him on to victory while he cheers me on as well. And writing is nothing if not an exploration of humanity. When you go on group rides, it's always fun to follow a rider who is better than you. You literally follow their line as if on a tightrope. You are so close to their back tire that you can't necessarily see the trail before you the way they can. But you can see the line they take. You can see how they swerve to miss a loose rock or hit a fallen limb straight on without braking. You are propelled into their high lean on a berm or know when to lift from the seat for a descent. You are watching the rider more than the trail itself. Your body becomes an extension of theirs, and you learn from that. Your body adopts it. It is spellbinding. Perhaps you are even leading the group ride the next time. This is what literary characters can do for you. Take you on a group ride of sorts, show you their lines. Consequently, this is the elasticity of empathy and why we write. We provide experiences that give readers insight. into the lifelines of others. I'm going to stop there.
Wow.
Beautiful, Annette Saunooke. Thank you. Thank you for that beautiful reading. And it's just it's always such an honor to hear work read aloud, right? I feel like there's something that heralds back to how storytelling was originally and is so often. I think for Native people, our stories are oral and they come to the page. I love telling people, like, we've been around a lot longer than the publishing press. And so it's lovely that we get to do the publishing thing. But also, the work is always in the air. It's the stuff of elasticity, like you said. I talk about elasticity of presence in one of my poems and how we connect with our people that way. So I was jiving with you, Annette. Thank you. And I have an uncle who's a biker, so I was just thinking about him during that. He's one of my favorites. So that was beautiful. So I'm Ari Tyson. Ishbishgena, hello. Jamipa, hello, friends. I'm really honored to be here with Rich and Annette and with Writers and Books. I feel like this conference is lovely, especially if they're inviting Native people. That makes me happy. And I'm looking forward to our discussion and talking more deeply about the intersections and kind of theme. So I'll kind of get out of the way before before we get talking. I'll read some work. So I think I'm going to read from my book. I'll be the basic person here that does that. Though I was tempted to do an essay that's unpublished that I've done somewhere, but I will stick with the book. And I love your earrings, by the way, Annette. My son is obsessed with the lightning right now because he's a big character in Bree folklore. Yes. He's married to the ocean, actually. So they've got a thing going. So I love the earrings already. Okay, so I'm going to read from Saints of the Household, which is a young adult novel. It is written in 2 points of view. So there's Jay's point of view and then there's Mac's point of view. And Jay's point of view is written in vignettes, so shorter paragraphs. Usually these vignettes aren't longer than a page or two. I really like this format for Jay because he's kind of a thinker. He's a little more mathematical. He likes to evaluate things and kind of think deeply about them. And so that comes out in the format that he communicates in. Also thinking about oral storytelling, oftentimes our stories, if we were to write them down, they tend to be about a page or two long. Think about your favorite family story. If you were to write it down, it would be about that shape. So I kind of like to honor that shape through the vignette in this book anyway. And then Max is the other brother, and he is a painter. And so all of his sections are in poetry. And so I'm going to read some sections from Jay from the beginning. I'm also going to read a translation of one of our stories that is the only one in existence in English at the moment. I mean, there's 2 retellings in the book. And there are other translations of other stories, but in terms of these stories, best I know, these are the only ones that have been translated this way into English. And I did that work with my mentor, from my tribe. So I'll read some vignettes from Jay, and then we'll look at one retelling bit. I like to say that I cheated and that I have my ancestor's voice in this book because I got to do some translation work. So the book isn't all me. And then I'll go to Max's voice and some poetry. Okay, so this is from the beginning, part 1, Jay. Communion. We hold deep, dark cups, dark like the cloth they bring out on Maundy Thursday to place over the cross and tables at Hope Oak Church. I keep crying at the time of reflection, asking God for forgiveness, for kicking the neighbor's dog, for shouting at the sky, for beating up that boy, and maybe even worse, for hurting Nicole. I can't stop thinking about it before I am told to eat the cracker and drink the 2-inch cup of black red wine. Hold the cup tight enough and you can see your heart beating in the surface, even when you doubt it's there. And yet, 2. First day back. People try not to look at us in the hallway. After we'd been suspended for 2 weeks, our classmates scatter like we might swallow them. Us, these angry brown boys ready to snap. What does it mean when we scare everybody, the good and the bad? Maybe someday I will walk down the hall and someone will see human in me. It won't just be Mom, God, and Max. Is Nicole in that group? I haven't seen her since the woods, only direct messaging her my apologies, no response. Max follows close behind, his coyote eyes averting, and I feel all my pull-ups bulk in my arms, my stomach, and in the veins that plump thick down my forearms. I keep my chin up, keep my lips tight, and I am grateful that we are taller than most. This way I can't see their eyes, their fear of us. This way I am not tempted to want more. I also realized I forgot to introduce my physical description, so I'm going to do that for you all real quick. So I am a woman in her late 20s. I have dark hair. It's pulled back in a bun, but it's very long if it were out. And then I'm also wearing a kind of cream-colored shirt and a checkered sweater and black earrings that my sister made. Okay, so now I'm going to move on to a vignette about Nicole, which is one of the Anishinaabe characters or Ojibwe characters in the book. And she is their cousin that that was having this issue out in the woods with her boyfriend, and that it was her boyfriend that they beat up in the woods, and that kind of happened before the book. And then it kind of comes out that Max and Jay have their own abuses that they're enduring at home, and so their own kind of violence came out sideways. And I kind of joke that the beginning of this vignette is like for the white people to understand how like so many Native people are connected and related, even cross-tribally. So that's, I joke a little bit about this beginning of this one. Okay, Nicole. I go through the day without seeing her. Nicole and us, we are cousins, the complicated kind, but cousins nonetheless. She's my father's step-niece. Her mother is his stepsister, and before Nicole's parents divorced in 5th grade, she grew up just a few miles from us. She went to the same schools, and we were friend cousins in class, inseparable, and family cousins on holidays. She, her mom, her dad, her sister, Tia were the only Native family we had on our dad's side. She, her sister, and her mom enrolled at Red Lake Nation, dad's side intertwined only by marriage. Tia is a clothing designer and jewelry designer studying in New Mexico, and she was the one to smooth talk the adults, the one with the coolest clothes, wearing designer brands she'd revamp from the steals she'd find at thrift stores or save up for at the mall. But Nicole had always been book brilliant. She'd be the first one to teach us something new, psychology, herbology, ecology, the cousin who would take some distant relative's baby in her arms and show us their reflexes, a finger for their hand to clasp, a graze to the cheek, and they'd get all wide-eyed and hungry. I know she now studies the mind, reaction, attachments, and misplacements. What did she learn about Max and me from that day in the woods? My stomach turns. But she's always had empathy, even for the bullies, befriended most people at school. And I remember how Nicole cared for herself too, making meals, doing her own laundry. Meanwhile, Max and I were just trying to figure out how often to shower. Grandpa taught us to respect our relatives here and to know whose land we're on. The ever and always truth is that we, all of us, are on Anishinaabe land here in northeastern Minnesota. We are all on Nicole's land. All right, so next I'm going to read the story, which is called The Two Men and the Mystical Eagles, and then I'll get to some poetry after. Growing up, Mom would tell us the story of the mystical eagles so often before bed that I can't remember not knowing it. The mystical eagles were the dragons of Talamanca, large beak, black inky wings and machete talons. They'd come down from the mountains, tearing children from their mother's arms, snatching those who went out on the day from the pathways. And the mystical eagles had become so terrifying that our people didn't leave home in fear of never returning. The whole tribe decided to fast, and 2 young men were chosen to stop the eagles. They went to their awa, and he blessed their knives and rope and tobacco. Then a few women wove a basket so large, so strong, with huge handles that it would be easy to snatch and carry. And in the night, the men slipped into the basket, and the female eagle came and took it high to a nest of bones where her 2 growing chicks were hungry. There, the 2 young men smoked tobacco, and like bees, the female and 2 young mystical chicks fell asleep. And from the mountain to their deaths, they fell. Finally, the male eagle came, and the men began to smoke, and he too fell asleep. And when he did, they swiftly took a knife to his throat and cut him to pieces. They had succeeded. Then the man looked down from the nest and could see their people's homes. With their rope, they lowered themselves from the mountain right down to Sibudi, or the river where Cebu swam, where they made a canoe that led them back to Talamanca, where our people were finally safe. The mystical eagles never returned. And then I think I'm just going to read one poem from Max. It's a concrete poem, so the format looks like a piece of piece of art. I tried to have some of the poems mimic physical art because he's a painter, so we kind of get there as the book moves on. So this is later in the book, and it's called Constellation Installation. Okay. Are the constellations just various women, men, children, people pulled into the sky and left? I paint the stars. For Via de la Estrella, each one I think of pieces of what would have been light stuck there. Reminders to us to keep shining the light, the pieces of God he placed in us. And I think I'll end there. Thank you.
Thank you, Ari.
Yeah, Ari, that was beautiful. I love hearing your work. I love how seamlessly your words capture this oral tradition, right? And then also modern technology post. Like, I mean, I love hearing writers who connect to the full history of people, right? And don't just place it in one time period. So thank you for sharing.
Back up to you, and
Yeah, there's when you were at the beginning about storytellers and bringing it onto the page as being oral originally, that reminded me of my teacher who was from Black Mountain College with Charles Olson about taking it off the page and through the body, the voice, into the air, into the person's ear, through their body to bring it alive. And that's exactly what I'm feeling here.
Absolutely. Well, and I'm thinking about Annette and how you talked about your work, well, the writing and the physical space meeting. And that's so beautiful. And so I was just thinking about even like familiar plains. I live out in a valley, and I grew up in the city, so I'm sometimes like tired of seeing the same thing every day. But there's something really beautiful and durable about that. And to think about you matching or bringing your language with that action, it feels again like so ancient, but in a contemporary life, right? And I think that's the kind of interesting part about being Native in some ways, is that like we have access to tradition. And then we are also contemporary people, so we have things like internet and Zoom, right? Like I joke with people, I'm like, like we're still here, and that means like we have all the technology, we have the stuff of today. It's not like we're just people from way back. But I love that. I love that, and how we honor tradition and ancient action with our now is just so beautiful. And thinking about it being part of your process is just lovely.
Yeah, thank you. Yeah, I often talk to students about like that's the magic of what we do, right? Is that the ink on a page has to have a physical effect on somebody who sees it, right? That's our goal, and how oddly magical that is, right? But it's I think our oral traditions really speak to that. How you can, well, first of all, how you can capture an audience to sit there and listen to a story, sometimes for hours, right? There's a magic to that as well. So, and it's all about rhythms, right? Oral traditions all about rhythms, and it's where we get it to begin with. So it's almost like an element to that magic. I always joke that I push back against magical stereotypes of Native characters, right?
Okay.
That you can talk to animals, right? Like Pocahontas and her Disney raccoon or whatnot. But and I always push back against that. And then on the flip side, I always say, but writing is magic. Like you're totally trying to create an emotion in somebody else. So I just think that we're fortunate that our cultural backgrounds, give us a different perspective to listening to story with maybe some different tools. So, feel really honored that we have that.
Well, absolutely. Well, and I think there's things that, that young writers and seasoned writers can glean in that. I often tell my students, because I teach an MFA program, is to read your work aloud. If they're really struggling with that rhythm or the kind of the line or their diction, right, their word choice, and like read it aloud and see how it feels. And I think that tuning of your ear can do so much. And for some of us, we kind of have a little help from the people before us, or we have learned to appreciate it. With Bree-Brees, we joke that you can only really hear one or two Bree stories in a day, and so that's all you get. Like you get to binge Bree stories, so you have to listen, right? Like if you're gonna get told one, you're gonna sit there and listen, right? And I actually follow that tradition in Saints. A lot of people read this in a day, and my goal was just wild to me. I can't even imagine why people would read my work, but then to read it in a day, that just blows my brain because I'm a slow reader. But I made it so that if they finish it in a day, they're only getting 2 Bree stories. So everybody's still following tradition, even if it's. But anyway, sorry, Rich, you probably have great questions, and we're just talking.
No, it reminds me a little, Annette. I think I learned online that you were looking at some older Cherokee stories that had moral that were meant to inform decisions and maybe how they can be brought into modern decision making or even politics, I imagine. but locally also, because I noticed that on a feed a month ago, the Eastern Band had voted to make last month Indigenous Languages month in that sense, but incorporating stories in your research to bring it to modern day. Is that what you're still doing?
Yeah, so that's what the current novel I'm working on is kind of formed around. When you talk about a work in progress, it always gets real convoluted till it's done. But so I'll try to say this as clearly as possible. But I was really interested in, we have 7 core values in our tribe, and we talk about how those should influence our decision making. And so I always ask the question, well, do they, right? Do they today? Are we really making our decisions based on those core values, and how do we interpret those core values? And I think when you talk in terms of core values, you always have to go back to those oral histories and those stories that are foundational to who we are as a people. And what I found interesting is that the largest collection of Cherokee stories is actually a collection by James Mooney, who's a white anthropologist, from several decades ago. And it's one that on the one hand, scholars and we as a tribe rely on because it is a written collection that's accessible. However, it is through a lens that is not our own. There are all these backstories about how Mooney was told information that may or may not have been accurate, right? Some people may have been messing with him a little bit, because that happens too when researchers come to a Native community. And so I really have been thinking a lot about those stories and what is in them, or how those stories have actually influenced our own values, right? How that perspective has influenced our own values, and started pairing those stories with oral stories that have kind of the same plot line, so to speak, but it's amazing how different they are. And so there's a character in my book, a young woman in the high school who is kind of using this as a project to see how eventually it kind of turns out how women's voices and how women are represented in our cultural values. And so that moves right into a modern landscape of politics, not just for our tribe, but for the United States, as you can imagine, with women's reproductive rights, and what do our cultural values say about that, right? And why do they say that? So that's kind of the backdrop of what I'm writing about. Of course, it's a fictional story with characters who have their daily lives going on. It's very contemporary. But I'm always interested in, I just think it's important that when we are faced with a very difficult decision, to do our very best to rely on our values to make those decisions, and to make sure that our values are really coming from our cultural perspective and not a perspective of someone who is studying us necessarily.
Oh, I love that. I love that. You know, there's something about, I teach autoethnography, right? Like so we have ethnography, like, right, that's all over Native history, like people coming in and taking our stories and writing them down and feel like they're doing probably something good, or, you know, or something subversive, or they can't, you know, they're doing something subversive already. But it's, you know, and it's so interesting because ethnography is, like, in part, yes, it's a limb of preservation for a lot of Native people, but also, you know, there's this other form of study that Zora Neale Hurston did with of Meals and Men, which is autoethnography, right? Going to our own people, writing our own stories down, taking note of the stories that were happening then, that were going on, and then recording them from herself as a Black woman from those communities, and just kind of the potency of that work. And I think it's fabulous when we start doing that for ourselves. And really, that is what our contemporary stories, I think, are, is our own autoethnography of saying, here are our stories. Our stories also matter. Our traditional stories, yes, matter too, but as do our contemporary stories. These are also, in that way, autoethnography as well. But I love that work because it really does, it kind of, it allows us to be the speaker. And so often we've been kind of, we've had to go through ethnography, and now it just, not so often. I mean, we've always had our stories, but it's just been, in terms of the outside eye, right? These are the stories we have because they are in a, you know, whatever peer-reviewed article, and you can find it in thus and thus library, right? It's like, you know, and being able to get our stories back or reclaimed or renamed in our own way is really beautiful. So I love that work that you're doing, of kind of balancing these and looking at and taking them and looking at the value system too. It's kind of fun, like, for example, with the story that I shared, you know, I could share the Bree story, and if somebody just knows, like, the summary of my book, they can assume that the Bree retelling, if they don't have any other context, they assume different things about that story. They assume that it's kind of like they feel bad for the eagles, like they feel bad, like, you know, or they, you know, they question the boys, you know, which is so interesting because it's such a Western idea, right? It's like, these are our own people protecting our own people, and how dare you kill these eagles that are monsters that are coming in, you know? So it's even a colonial idea, right? Like, how dare you, these poor animals? So they have a very different idea about what that story means, but in the context of the book, then you realize that these boys are those two young men, and they are dealing with their own colonized issues that they are having to have responses to, in order to save themselves and to save their people. And it's not necessarily a choice they can even have, right? They you know, they can't even exist outside of their own house, right? So just like their people couldn't exist outside of their own. So it's just interesting to see, you know, again, what our stories do to the like to our traditional stories, and what they help maybe an outsider interpret.
Absolutely. Yeah, it reminds me of, I mean, one of the reasons why I started this project is the story of Shailu, who is the Corn Mother, so the first woman of the Cherokee, and her story. It would take too long to get into it all, but Mooney's rendition of it basically is that she is this martyr for the people, but it's a very, like, Christian interpretation of that story. So yeah, I think it's really interesting how, you talk about the Bree story, that how quickly it's read a different way just because of other cultural context from outside. That's great.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, I almost had the sense when I got to that part in your book, Ari, that the eagle is almost like there's these boys are trying to slay a dragon. That there's this facing, and I take this from both of your books, like the main characters, like their futures are on the line, like as individuals, their family history, their cultural history that both of you are bringing in, that I just get this mind-boggling sense that it's all inseparable, that as Native or Indigenous, these elements of place where Cherokee and growing up in Minnesota, even, being very aware of the environment, but also Costa Rica having an underlying, just your rootedness that is hard to explain, like
Yes.
kinship even. And just that idea of trying to survive in this modern world by reaching back to the ancestors to bring it forward present.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, there's something so durable about stories, right? They are. I love how you brought up like morals, like your morals and your with your people, and those kind of pillars of morals, and then how the stories are in conversation with those. Because yeah, stories of they are very durable. They can exist in our minds, and we can pass them down, and that's a powerful thing. What was I going to say? I had another thought here. But also I love, for me, I love looking at folklore and traditional stories, because they kind of have this, right, like multi-voiceness to them because many people have passed them down. And so instead of just having like the one writer, right, like we have in the Western world, they have these multitudes of voices to them. But also, but also they're kind of boiled down. Like, again, I love Zora Neale Hurston, but she says like it's like the boiled down pot liquor. Folklore is like the boiled down pot liquor of humanity, which means like basically the broth. Like if you boil everything down, kind of like a moral, right? It's going to be a story. Like that's the folklore. And so I remember telling a poet who's like and I love flowery poetry. I mean, I have studied poetry. I've taught poetry in college. Like I can do the flowery stuff if I want to. So it's not out of inability. But I once talked about, to her, because she was like, I think she was responding to some poetry as feeling utilitarian. And I was like, well, if write a 2-page flowery poem and have an invader come in, are you gonna be able to remember that poem? Like, are you gonna, are you gonna remember every metaphor and every line that, all the flowery stuff? Is that gonna be durable? Is that gonna survive colonization? It might not. Maybe it will if you all got some really amazing memory going on. But most likely no, right? So there's something about this boiled down pot liquor of humanity in our stories and poetry. And for us, some of our songs they are simple and beautiful, and they're meant to be appreciated. And they have these incredibly amazing turns, if I'm going to talk about poetry, right? Like amazing revelations in them. But they might have a different they have a utility because they have survived. They are a utility to us. So it's interesting sometimes to hear contemporary poets talk about this kind of thing and be like, well, like I can memorize a Lucille Clifton poem. I can memorize a Joy Harshaw poem. Give me somebody else's flowery. No way. No, not happening. It doesn't mean that the flowery poem isn't important and can't do good work. But when we think about Native people in our history, like we have to, like, I love thinking about that. That our art isn't just for expression, like it's also utility.
Oh, I love that so much. I love thinking about that connection to, it goes back to this discussion about is a river cane double woven basket in Cherokee, is it, and there's a map behind me, you can probably see, right? Like some people refer to it as craft and some people refer to it as art. And there's a whole discussion in our community about what is it. And it's funny because, in fact, a lot of the individuals who have perfected this would even say it's a craft, right? Because it is utilitarian as well. And we don't want to lose that aspect of our art, that other folks would say is art, even though the art, quote unquote, tends to have a higher value, like monetary value or something. So I love thinking about that. And I love the connection to form and structure that you're talking about. Something I'm really fascinated with. I know there are some Indigenous writers who are working on their own narrative arcs in a way, like their own forms. And because Western culture is so tied to the hero's journey, and that doesn't exactly make sense, as you were saying, that it's more of a collective journey, right? Not that one hero. And I was just saying this in a meeting this morning. I'm on the board of our museum in Cherokee, and we were talking about storytelling. And I was just saying that I had a friend in college who's Lakota, and I will never forget that he said one time, there's no such thing as the Native American autobiography. I was like, that's so true, right? Like, culturally, to give your own story as the story, right? This hero's journey, it doesn't quite fit. I'm all about abstraction and changing forms of genre and whatnot, but I love that Native writers, Indigenous writers are thinking about form and structure too, that makes more sense to the storytelling we've done for so long. So I love that, Ari. Thanks for sharing all that.
Oh, well, I feel like, right, this is all like so many of us, because of like we get it. And I think it's interesting because I love that as more Native writers are building body of work in this, like, Western contemporary canon or whatever we want to call it, is that there's more pushback, because I remember, sending out like a translation of a Bree song and getting like rejection. And I'm thinking, y'all don't even know what you're missing right now. Like, like, this isn't even mine. This is a translate. Like, this is not, again, like, not even my work. This is like, comes from like old stuff, y'all. Like, this is the oldest submission you're probably getting here. Like, and, and it's interesting to me to see that, and then to realize that also the work of other poets or the other writers that have had to push back against kind of what the expectation is. And really, yeah, it's hard to do. Or even like in these contemporary conversations about what is poetry, right? It's like, well, if you're just wanting this, then you're cutting out a whole lot of people, and you're missing something, and so I do like the kind of space that we're in, the kind of muscle that we can have, because it's just kind of like inviting everybody to reality. Like, we're already doing this. This is already here. So if you want to put it in your literary journal or you want to publish it, like, you're welcome to. But like, it's kind of an exciting time, and I'm grateful to people like Joy Harshaw who have stepped, who've been some of the first that have allowed and paved ways for so many of us. Joy Harshaw was actually one of the few people who knew of my tribe right when I met her. She was like, oh, like, what people are you? Bree. She's like, oh, I know about your people. I'm like, what are you? Who are you? I know who you are, but oh my gosh, Joy. So it's like kind of stuff is really, really spectacular. Yeah, and she gave me a lot of wisdom in that time of just because because again, for me too, Bree, we don't have stories in the U.S. This is the first one. So it does feel pretty special, but also, yeah, we do have to kind of bust our own spaces and claim our own voices and room for it, and the formats that we use, and kind of demand some respect for it, or have everyone catch up later and whatever.
Where do you feel that you get both of you, your voices, the strength to, or whether it's a grandmother's example or someone or that gives you the gall to even say that? Because there was an interview of you, Ari, where you finally found a publisher that was willing to work with you being outside of the box, and there's for me, when I've written poetry, it's honoring the poem, so it takes shape in the form that it wants to, and not the way I would like it to. Similarly, with Naomi Shihab Nye or someone, is like the point of trying to write something you think you want to say, but it says something else that's even more. It's a discovery. Like, what is that process, and how do you even pass it on to people? Why? What is it in you that wants to pass your passion on? And in what way do you do that? And as a teacher in a high school and university, I believe, Annette, like, you have a permanent audience in a sense, and then with Ari, you're bouncing around with so many different populations. What's the commonality?
Do you want to speak first, Annette? Or...
Oh yeah, I'll probably just try to talk my way through an answer here. I mean, it's funny because I just latched onto the word. I think you said. I almost think. Did you say grandmother? Like what? I don't know that.
Yeah. So, some.
I just, I was thinking about this today for a different reason, but I am very fortunate that I do come from a long line of outspoken women on both sides of my family. And so I think, I have been raised in a family that believes that all voices should have a platform. Number one. And then I think, as Ari was talking about, I'm 43, so I have been fortunate to to see these Indigenous voices stake claim on the literary landscape unabashedly, unapologetically, and to see that you can do that. But I will say this for me specifically, because of where my tribe is in Western North Carolina. So, in the Southeast, I do feel like as a writer, it was pretty isolated from other Indigenous voices, which are mostly out West. To be honest, those that have, been published and all that. So the Native literary community really hasn't been that accessible to me through most of my career. And what has been, though, and what has been really affirming is an Appalachian community, which has faced similar pushback from the publishing world, right? For the way that we speak in Appalachia, this connection to land. But there's a lot in common between specifically Cherokee, but probably all Indigenous groups, and Appalachia, which is this firm love and connection of this land, and a powerful protection of it from extraction and all extractive purposes. So I have really found community in an Appalachian community of writers who are activists for this place, and have been fortunate for that. So while I definitely am grateful to Native writers who've been mentors and supporters, just I think because of geographical location, a lot of this confidence to write about this place and confidence to write and speak up has come from an Appalachian writing community for me.
Oh, I love that. I love that. Well, I do. I think our relationships with each other people, whether they be Native or not, is such a, it brings us back to the roots of be a good relative, right? Like whatever that means, settler or not, like we're gone. And some of us are better than others. So it's good to find those that are working, that's beautiful. For me, I grew up in Minnesota, right? So I was surrounded. I mean, I grew up going to Birch Bark Books, which has been an advocate for sane since before it came out, and they, it's owned by Louis Erdrich, and I just grew up with lots of Native, influence of writers, and at least could feel like I could see it done when I was little. Though at the time, Louis's work was very historical, so that was a little bit
What are your approaches as teachers to come in and open people's hearts so that they can express or find a way that there's a commonality, that they can find ways to identify and heal or express, that you bring that allows that space? What is that space that you create?
You know, I think first and foremost, and I think a lot about when I taught high school students, right? Because there's an aversion to reading and writing that manifests in like middle school, high school that I don't quite understand. Because I mean, I have my own children, right? And I see this love of writing stories and reading when they're young, and then something happens, and I'm desperate to figure out how we heal this for kids. I have some ideas, but so as a high school teacher, the first thing I think I always just want to see where they're at. Like, what do you need, right? What how do you feel unseen? In what ways are people not listening to you, do you think? Or what ideas do you want to share? And I don't start with writing them down, right? Just like, where are they? Because I don't think it's responsible of me as a teacher to start telling them what to say or how to say something if I don't even know what they want to say, or, you know, what they have to say. So that's the very first place. And then it's finding different platforms to communicate, and we communicate differently. So it may not be, again, ink on a page to begin with, right? Let's have a conversation. I always I would have this questionnaire at the beginning of class. It was like, what do you like to read? It's like, what do you like to read? And always, I'd have students like, I don't like to read anything. I'm like, oh, you don't like to read that text message you just read on your phone that I just saw you read on your phone? And you laugh. I'm like, yes, you do. We just got to figure out what that looks like.
That's so great. And that's such important work. Somebody who writes for teenagers, I'm just starting to like be more with teenagers. I was just in Colorado for a school-wide read, and it was like, it's so cool to be in the room. And I taught people that had both read the book and hadn't. And it was just such a cool space, both. I like actually preferred going to the kids that hadn't read the book. So I was like, we're just gonna do poetry. I get to hear your voices, right? That's not about me. Because usually they want like the author talk, right? So it's like, I like hearing from the kids. But in terms of the MFA program, I have a couple of things. It's been really fun to really work with people who are wanting to work with non-Western structures, who are wanting to play with hybridity or write verse novels, for example, or all these different things. And I will try not to violate FERPA, but it's amazing. These students are brilliant, and it's so cool to be alongside them along these journeys, because it is often me getting to know their stories, like say, what culture you come from, what is your tradition that you're drawing from, like help me see some of that, right? And then helping them figure out a way to have that on the page, or they already in some way do, but maybe need a little support with that. And I tell people always, if you're doing something weird, you got to flex a little bit. And then you also have to invite the reader into, depending on who you're writing for. If you are trying to publish in a Western publishing world, you have to teach the reader how to read your book. Because if they are new to this form, and especially writers for young kids, right? I think it's different writing for adults, but writing for teenagers, we are writing for, usually a wide audience. And we want the teenagers to understand, right? We want them to grow and have those experiences. If we hold them at arm's length, they're going to feel it and put the book down. But if we want to invite them into seeing our culture and the way of being that we are, and also invite the Native kids, right, to be seen themselves, we both need to do invitation and true representation and inclusion, actually. So like our own voices need to be seen and held at the table, and actually at the head of the table in a way, right? Because this is our stories, these are our books. So so oftentimes that's like inviting the reader into a structure. So let's say like one of my students, she comes from a culture that has a certain way of telling childhood stories. And so I said, let's invite the reader on that. Because she was just doing it without any explanation. And so a lot of people were like, I don't know what's going on here. It's like, yeah, that's like, maybe in your second book we can do this. But for now, we need a little bit of help, a little bit of context. And then everybody can see what you're doing. And then we know. And then we're on board, because we're like, oh, we get the context. We get, and then again, if you're writing for a big audience, you kind of have to do that invitation in some way. It's up to you, of course, but if not, then you don't have to do the invitation. But again, we write for young people, so it's who we want to bring with us. Who do we want to heal? Who do we want to grow? So it is a giving in that way. Yeah, and then of course, right, like holding yourself at the table and at the head of it. So where does that get to be, and how do you get to demand space? And usually, once you get that reader on board, even for something little, they're going to be on board for everything that you don't explain, because you've at least given them something. And that, I think, is the kind of the biggest thing that I say for students. And not everybody has to do invitation. It depends on kind of what your people group is and what they're like, what everybody knows about it. Some people know nothing about Bree. So I've had to do structure. Like I've had to teach people how to read the book. It's written, and then we learn quickly what the structure is going to be like, and then that's promised throughout the book, right? But I also say, like, flex, like do what you're doing and be proud of it and own it. But it might just take a little bit of invitation. That's all. And any person doing something different, it's going to have to bring people on board, right? Like it's going to have to convince them a little bit. And that's okay too. I think it's just part of where we are in literature right now. And hopefully we have to do less of the convincing and invitation later. But right now seems to be what people need.
It almost feels like there's a vulnerability there that we're trying to provide, that we're providing for ourselves as writers. And I know that word came up with Annette yesterday, but even the story I've heard of online, of course, but of you, Annette, sharing your experience of submitting manuscripts, and for your own students to be able to learn from your own experience. And for me, I'm probably one of millions who, if I think I'm rejected, then I act rejected, and I give up. But it's so hard to keep going, and then to believe, or to have this sense of this overwhelming sense of just, this is what I have to do. What like, there's this energy. How do you share or get through that vulnerability for yourself and for others to encourage?
Yeah. I've been thinking about this because I just got rejected for a fellowship. So I've been like, but I actually have found that when I have success, I get real nervous, because we all know that it's just like this. It is never consistent, right? So when I have success, I'm like, oh no, what's going to go wrong? And so there's a little piece of me that actually gets excited about rejection because I'm like, well, this is keeping me like even keel, in the long run, right? So something good is on the other end of this. And that, I think it takes a lot of time, right, to get to that place where that there's something that always comes after. There's always something next. And that honestly is what keeps what keeps me going. Yeah, and what Rich is referring to is, I used to, when I was trying to find a publisher or an agent for my novel, I would not open the email responses I got back until I was in front of my class, and I was like, "We got a response. Let's see what it was." So that they get it, that it's not always success, and especially when I was teaching honors students, that's something they had to learn, that you're not going to get better if you're always getting an A+ on everything, right? So yeah, I try to keep that same mentality for myself.
Mm-hmm. Are we talking about the wave? Did I miss I might have missed the question.
Oh, just vulnerability, and how do we continue to encourage ourselves but others? And if you have any ideas, we'll end after that, and then we'll get to the surprise at the end from the both of you. But
okay, so
time is running out, sadly.
Okay, all good. I'll be quick. Yeah, I think, kind of like what we've been talking about already, is it's helpful for me to always remember that our stories have existed for a really long time, and the publishing machine press has only existed for this much time. So really my identity is, in so many other places, whether it's my faith or my motherhood, or, that kind of thing. But also the storyteller. The storyteller is so rooted in who I am that it doesn't matter if it's going to be out in a book, or if it's going to be a poem somewhere. Sometimes I try to make a practice of reading stuff I haven't published. I didn't do that today, but because I like to remember that muscle of, I'm a storyteller no matter what. This could be the only thing that I have. I have other stuff coming up. But if I didn't, it would be okay, right? Because I'm a storyteller. That's who I am. It doesn't matter what the page looks like in terms of where it goes. That stuff matters in other ways.
Yeah.
But my identity and who I am is rooted in something much deeper than that. And so that's what really roots me through kind of every. I really don't mind rejection. I have really thick skin. And I always want to learn something. I like to challenge myself. So I do like my second book is completely in prose, and it took me a year to relearn how to write prose. And I'm trying to do a mystery, which is like, as a poet, it's like, what are you doing? But like, I'm trying, right? Like, I want to learn, I want to push myself. So I think it helps to kind of remember the history and the current self, and what's ahead is a little less scary when you can think about those things. Yeah.
Yeah, and I don't want to take this time in a sense, but I remember this poet Carol Merrill. She was an assistant to Georgia O'Keeffe, and Carol, in her poem, she was so I guess downtrodden, a lack of confidence with her own work, because how do you present something that has never been written before? And Georgia responds, well, what did the Chinese do? They had no one to compare themselves to, was the idea, which is one of my favorite poems. But I think, let's see. Oh, yes, we have just enough time. Sadly, time has gone by so quickly, but because I've been a fanboy over these last few weeks of the both of you, would love to have you read some more of your work. And Annette, if you have anything that you'd like to share to end, and then Ari, I believe you have a poem to end, but it'd be great to hear your voices through your work one more time. And thank you so much for joining us. That's such a pleasure and an honor. And if there's anything you'd like to conclude with or say, or you haven't, and it's on the top of your head, feel free.
Well, I'll just read a little bit of the prologue then for my novel real quick so we can get to Ari's poem. So this is from Even As We Breathe. About the place, when I take you there or when you find it on your own, just know that what the old folks say is true. This land is ours because of what is buried in the ground, not what words appear on paper. But also know this, what is buried in the ground isn't always what you think. It's just the beginning. It's the beginning of the story, the beginning of all of us who call ourselves Homo sapiens. Fitting, I guess, that what I found buried, what I found buried, just as I was trying to figure out how to become a man and still be human, was the very thing that threatened to take it all away. Just when I began to see what taking control of my own life might look like, I realized I was not who I thought, and neither was this place. I'll just stop there.
Oh, beautiful. I just want to end there. That's cool that yeah, it's one thing when we talk about stuff, and then it's another thing when the work talks about it for us. And so I love that. Thank you. This is a poem we mentioned Naomi Shihab, who is one of the editors for this issue of Poetry Magazine, which is the only issue that they've done for young people. And so yeah, it was like a baby. I just sold my book, but it wasn't coming out for 3 years, and one of the editors reached out to me and asked for a poem, and I felt so incredibly honored because it's Poetry Magazine. I was like, what the heck? Never thought I'd have a publication in there until I was like 85 and dead or something like that. But here we are. So I have one, and it's called The Storyteller Gets Her Name. And I like to read this often when there are other writers in the room or other people listening that are writers or perhaps possibly writers. And so, yeah, so I felt really honored when it was asked to me to read this. Okay, The Storyteller Gets Her Name. My dad used to call me Eagle Eyes. I was the one to find eagles, owls, blue jays on a dark day. He called me so until my brother was born infant and grew to boy. And having heard my name, as younger siblings often do, he wanted to be called Eagle Eyes too. He studied the bird's flight, kept his eyes to the skies for hours, and soon he knew their long names and could correct me. Except at 16, I never liked to be corrected. But my brother, he showed me the work, and I had to learn to give him all I could as my elders did for me. So I tugged on my heart to let go, as I knew he had earned Eagle Eyes more than I ever could, and what I found instead was new room for a new name. I am Siwakul, storyteller, and my brother, he is Eagle Eyes. I tell his tales and mine, so someday when we join the elders, my stories may be told and his birds can take to the sky. But for now, I will share with you my story so that you can know who you are, and maybe you are Siwakul too.
Love it.
Thank you, Rich, so much for having us. I feel so honored, and to Writers and Books, it's just an honor.
Hi, Sakshi. Yeah, same here. It was a pleasure. And,
I just wanted, sorry, Rich, did you want to say anything else?
No.
I just wanted to echo that thank you. Thank you, Annette, Ari, and Rich. Thank you for being here today. And especially Annette and Ari, thank you so much for sharing so much of your work and yourselves with us. It's been a real honor being in this space with you all. And as a reminder to everybody, our panelists, their books will be available through Ampersand Books, and I encourage you to support them. Thank you. Thank you.
Bye, y'all. Thanks, Annette.